welcome to this afternoon's session 3A on digital solutions for behavior change. First, seek a quick review of the housekeeping rules. You can turn only the moderator speakers can turn on the camera because this Zoom has some capacity about the number of people can turn on cameras, and we have 3 sessions in parallel. And also the audio function for the participant, it will be muted. If you have any questions, please submit through the chat function. For this session, we'll have 5 very interesting presentations from different field studies, literature review. It will be very, we will hear them one by one. First, our first speaker is Dr. Verena Barthelmes. Her topic is triggers behind human building interactions from a user perspective, results and effectiveness of capturing motivations in real time. Verena is a postdoctoral research at the Thermal Engineering for the Built Environmental Lab at EPFL in Switzerland. After receiving a master's degree in architecture, she pursued her PhD in energetics at the Politecnico di Torino in close collaboration with the University of Cambridge and Technical University of Denmark. Her main research activities concern the analysis of the human-building interactions and its impacts on building energy use and environmental comfort. Dr. Barthelmes, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Okay, great. Okay, so thanks very much for the introduction, Xianli, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm, as you already said, Verena Barthelmes from EPFL in Switzerland, and today I'm going to present you our work entitled Triggers Behind Human Building Interactions from a User Perspective, Results and Effectiveness of Capturing Motivations in Real Time. I will get started with the background of the study. So basically, as you all probably well know, many studies and state-of-the-art reviews have shown that occupant behavior or the human building interactions represent a key factor of uncertainty when predicting building energy use. So there have been already many efforts to tackle this issue by developing, for instance, data-driven stochastic occupant behavior models that are oftentimes based only on physical measurements, and oftentimes these measurements pertain just to single dimensions of the environment rather than on a comprehensive framework that include, for instance, information on the thermal, olfactory, visual, and acoustic environment. So this means that gaining a more comprehensive and multidimensional understanding of drivers is still needed to better incorporate the user perspective in building operation and practice. So as I said, oftentimes the motivations are derived solely from physical measurements, but might not always reflect the real motivations behind why people are performing a certain interaction, such as window control or blind control. So we thought it would be useful to actually request feedback directly from the occupants in order to have insights on their actual perceived motivations. Of course, asking for active feedback where people have to interact with tools and surveys and so on, this might also increase the so-called Hawthorne effect, according to which the occupants' knowledge of being studied might affect their natural behavior. And this is exactly what we're trying to look into in the study. So basically, what I'm showing to you here is a screenshot of some results of a more comprehensive project, which is called the eCombine project, which stands for Interaction Between Energy Use, Comfort, Behavior, and the Indoor Environment. And here we're trying to develop an integrated approach to study the cause-effect relationships between the behavior of the occupants, the global environment, and the effect on energy use in open plan offices. And we're trying to do this by capturing an extensive set of subjective and objective multi-domain variables that are likely to drive the building occupants' actions. So, in particular, we in this framework we developed a mobile application which is called OB Drive, where we're directly asking feedback to the users when they perform certain actions. So, on one hand, as you can see here, we have the physical measurements of the environment and the tracked actions through, for instance, Windows state loggers. And on the other hand, we have the self reported actions and the underlying motivations directly provided through the user feedback. Here you can see how we approach this with a mixed experimental approach that combines basically objective data, so the environmental measurements in the office space, with subjective responses from the building occupants. As you can see here, a typical e-combine campaign lasted for 2 weeks, and this was then repeated during different seasons in different case study buildings. And in particular, today I'm going to show you a snapshot of some results of this in one of our case study buildings and during a winter campaign, which took place in February 2020. And the case study building was or is located in Geneva in Switzerland. Here, the people had the chance to freely interact with casement windows and external shades that were placed within 5 meters from their desk. They did not have really the chance to interact with the radiators, and the desk lights were automatically controlled. So, for sure, these would also be interesting actions to look at with the same approach, but since occupants did have only limited influence here, we did not take these actions into account. We had 31 participants, 65 of them were male, and most of them belonged to the age group from 22 to 34. And their main activity was typical office work, so mainly writing and typing on the personal computer. So here you can see the experimental setup. So all these colored stands actually are the experimental apparatus for the environmental measurements. But here in this presentation, I will, as I mentioned before, mainly focus on the mobile application, which was installed here. You can see that people had the phones installed close to the controls right next to them. So every time they interacted or opened a window, closed a window, and so on, they could actually report their motivations on this phone. On the other hand, we also installed Windows state loggers in order to track the actions also in an objective way. So here you can see the information flow of this OB Drive app. So first, people were asked to identify themselves so that we could also link their motivations to their specific desk position, to the environmental measurements that were taken at the specific desk position, and of course also to their personal characteristics. They were then asked to indicate the type of control action, so for instance opening and closing the windows and the blinds. And then they were asked to indicate why they operated or why they decided to take a certain control action. So you can see, for instance, because they felt too warm, because the air was too stuffy, because they wanted to boost their productivity, or because they were arriving and leaving, and so on. Of course, this screen changes according to the different actions. And then, in order to gain a deeper insight into the group dynamics, they were also asked to indicate if they did consult co-workers before operating the windows or the blinds. Okay, so now I will just give you some brief insights on what kind of information we could get out of this mobile application. So, of course, we could have insights into the number of records. So, for the different types of actions, so the window openings, window closings, blind openings, and blind closings. As you can see, in this case study building here, people tended to interact more with the blinds with respect to the windows. And another interesting thing was that the users actually used the application more constantly during the window opening actions rather than the closing actions. So this might have been more conscious rather than a quick closing action. On the other hand, we also saw that most of the times participants did actually not consult the co-workers before interacting with any type of controls. This is an example of the self-reported motivations behind the actions. So as you can see, we group the motivations into different categories: thermal, IQ, visual, acoustic, time-related factors, social, and others. For the window openings, you can see that the main motivations were related to warm and stuffy air. Oftentimes, these motivations were also reported together. The window closings were mainly related to the thermal environment and to time-related factors such as leaving. Blind openings were mainly related to too dim and to view outside. Here, as an example, view outside is something that is difficult to take into account in models, or it's not typically taken into account in models as a motivation. And the blind closings were related also mainly to the visual environment, but as you can see here, also it links to the thermal environment and also to other contextual factors such as arriving, leaving, or even maybe because a coworker asked to perform a certain action. So as I said before, of course, there is the risk when we ask active participation to the occupants that they might change their behavior, either because they're very curious to use the application or maybe because they're bothered and they actually then pertain from doing a certain action because they don't want to interact with the solution that we are offering. So this is basically why we looked at the number of tracked window openings, so basically based on objective data, at the actions before, during, and after the campaign. And you can see here that there was a peak when we installed the sensors because, of course, we tested them and did a lot of openings and closings. But if we look at the active interactive campaign, we can see that there was a slight but not significant increase of window opening actions when the mobile application was installed. Of course, this can also depend on a large variety of other factors, so we need to be careful with that. And we just checked that, for instance, the outdoor conditions were the same between before and during the campaign, and we couldn't find many differences. But still, we need to consider other factors as well that might, of course, influence the behavior. Another useful thing we found is that we could actually complement the self-reported actions with the measured actions from the state loggers. So you can see that 11% of the self-reported actions were not captured by the Windows state loggers due to, for instance, faulty connection. So having the self-reported actions allows to having a more a higher quality data set where we can combine the objective and subjective data that we collected. Okay. Finally, we also asked the users how often they did actually interact with the mobile phones installed close to the windows and blinds, and approximately 70% of the respondents answered that they had always or almost always reported their actions on the phones. So this means that actually the tool was accepted and that people did interact with the phones and used it while performing their actions. So just some conclusive remarks. So basically, we found that the OB Drive application was a quite helpful tool in order to gain insights into the real triggers between, or the perceived triggers at the moment of the action from the users. Without too much altering the behavior of the occupants. Of course, the motivations need to be compared further to physical measurements that are typically used to predict behavioral patterns. And in part, we have already started to do that. So you can see here a snapshot of another publication. Here, for instance, we found that thermal and olfactory aspects might be easily confused by the occupants. On the other hand, we found that it is also a benefit for the quality of the data because we can complement the objective measured actions with the window operation sensing solutions. And so, yeah, it can also be a benefit, let's say, for having more reliable data. However, I would also like to highlight that the outcomes that I showed here are based on data in one eCombine only and in one case study building. So the study had mainly an explorative purpose. And the results will be completed and analyzed in combination with additional physical measurements as well as additional data from our other pilot case studies. Okay, thanks for your attention. I think the questions will come afterwards. And here, just some contacts in case you have questions. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Barthelmes. This is very interesting presentation. We'll move on to the next presentation, and the questions and answers session will be in the end. And next, Amirreza is doing his PhD at EPFL, the same institution as Dr. Barthelmes in Switzerland since 2018. Before that, he did a master and a bachelor in Iran. His research interests are occupants' behavior, machine learning, and adaptive energy systems. Amirreza, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your introduction. Here, our research is about probabilistic machine learning for occupancy prediction based on sensor fusion. But why do we need to know the number of the people in a building? Basically, all of the building services are to satisfy the occupants. So if we know the number of the people in a building, we can better satisfy the occupants by regulating the services. For example, we can automate the scheduling of air conditioning, we can adapt the ventilation rates in a building, we can regulate the temperature set points, or we can manage the workspace in the institutional or office buildings. But a possible approach and a common approach to quantify the number of the occupants in a building is to use a camera. But there are certain issues with using with the use of cameras. First of all, it is expensive. Second, this is intrusive to the privacy of the people in the building. And at the end, this is very complicated to process the data. If it is pictures or frameworks of the videos, it would be very time-consuming and complicated to process this data to extract the number of the people present in the building. So an alternative way is to use the implicit occupancy sensing based on sensor fusion. And what does it mean is that we can use a combination of sensors that are expected to be correlated with the occupancy, such as motion sensors, CO2 sensors, or temperature sensors. And the benefit of using this method is that these sensors are very cheap compared to the camera. Most of them are commonly exist in a building, so we can just integrate the methods to the existing sensors. And they are not intrusive for the privacy of the people in the building. And we aim to use machine learning for the occupancy prediction. The idea is simple. We have a machine learning model that takes into as the input the combination of this sensor data, and the output of the machine learning model would be the number of the occupants, would be the predicted number of the occupants in the building. But as we know, the human behavior is highly stochastic, and there is a high level of uncertainty about the behavior of the humans. And therefore, the conventional models are deterministic, which means that they predict a value confidently, and they do not provide any information about how confident they are about this predicted number. And most of the researchers that have used these machine learning models, they have reported a good accuracy for the predictions, but the exact number of the people is not predicted properly. When we look at the visualization, we see that the number of the people in most of the times is not exactly what is the real number of the people in the building. So it is in this research, we aim to use a probabilistic machine learning model. And a probabilistic machine learning model basically predicts, first of all, the number of the occupants in a building. And in addition, it is providing the uncertainty of the predictions as an additional output, which can be very helpful for the automatic or for the automation processes or for the building managers to know what is the uncertainty of the prediction. So The methodology that we use for the probabilistic machine learning model is based on the Monte Carlo dropout presented by Gal and Bahramani on 2016. I wouldn't go into the details of this methodology. I would just highlight the two main differences between the probabilistic model and the deterministic models. The first and most important difference is the probabilistic loss function that we use in the methodology, and this probabilistic loss function takes into account the average of the predictions and also the standard deviation of the predicted number. And the second difference is the activation of Monte Carlo dropout during the test phase. This Monte Carlo dropout sometimes is used by the machine learning models during the train phase. But here we also activated this Monte Carlo dropout masks during the test phase, and therefore the prediction is not only one single number, rather we have a series of numbers as the predicted number of the people in the building, and therefore we report the average of these numbers and also the standard deviation of these numbers as the two outputs of the machine learning model. So the case study in this building was a four-floor academic office building in Ottawa, Canada. And this building was equipped with many different sensors, including CO2 concentration, PIR sensors for detecting the motion, plug and lighting power sensors, total power sensor, and also a very interesting feature that was monitored in this building was the number of connected Wi-Fi devices to the modem, which also was shown that is strongly correlated with the number of the people in the building. And to train a machine learning model, basically we need the ground truth data as the labels of the data sets. And the ground truth data in this case study was provided by camera installed on the entrance and exit points of the building. And sorry for that. And this basically case study was evaluated by another researcher, was called Hobson et al. And the data set is publicly available for the use, and we use their data set to develop these methods. So here you can see the plans of their case study. There are 4 floors in total, but we have focused on only 2 floors of this building. Here you can see the location of different sensors. For example, the motion sensors are mostly installed in the entrance of the rooms to capture the motions and entrance to each part of the building. And here we evaluated 2 probabilistic models, including LSTM model, which is a kind of machine learning model with a better memory to remind the sequence of the of the input data. And also we use the feed-forward neural network as the second probabilistic model. And as you see here, the input of these models is CO2 concentration, total power, motion, and the number of Wi-Fi devices. And the output is the number of occupants and also the uncertainty of the prediction. And we compared our predictions with the same layout, but rather using a deterministic model, which is only considering the number of occupants as output. Here is the results of the proposed methods in case of the accuracy of the models. As you can see, the accuracy of the probabilistic models are better, of the both the probabilistic models are better than the deterministic model, and they show a lower error in case of all the indexes. But these numbers might not be very sensitive and tangible. So we have also provided the diagrams showing comparing the predictions with the real number of the occupants in the building. Here is the predictions by the 2 probabilistic models over the 2 different floors. I would focus here on one of the diagrams. As you see in this diagram, the green line is the deterministic model. The red line is the ground truth data, which is the actual number of the people in the building. And also the purple line is the predicted mean by this LSTM model. And then this shadow area is basically the uncertainty or the standard deviation of the predictions by this probabilistic model that we have developed. So as you see, in most of the time and most of the hours, the predicted number is not exactly matching with the number of the people in the building, which is expectable because the human behavior is highly stochastic and it is very hard for the machine learning models to exactly predict the number of the people. But in our approach, we are providing an additional information, which is uncertainty of the prediction provided by this, shown by this shadow area. And as you see here, the shadow area is very well covering all the times the exact number of the people in the building. And therefore, it would be very useful additional information for the building owners or for the building managers that can rely on that. For example, for a conservative operation of the air conditioning systems, they can rely on this maximum number of the predictions rather than the average of the predictions. Thank you very much for your attention, and I would be happy to answer the questions at the end.
Thanks a lot, Amirreza. Our next presentation will be from Dr. Devon Wemyss. She will compare the difference between academic and commercial perspectives on app-based energy behavior change. And Dr. Wemyss has researched and published in applied natural and social science in the field of innovation, sustainability, and energy since 2013. She's based at the Zurich University of Applied Sciences in Switzerland, and she's a PhD researcher at the University of Sussex, focusing on the potential impacts of digital technology for energy behavior change. She investigates real-world challenges of the social-technical energy transition at the individual and the community levels. Dr. Wemyss, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Yes, maybe just to clarify, I'm not yet a doctor, so I'm still researching as a PhD, just to be clear. So I'll present, as was introduced, on the differences between research-driven projects and commercially driven projects that are all aiming for the same goal of energy behavior change. The setting of this probably doesn't need such a big introduction, but we all know that digitalization has been affecting many different areas of life, particularly the energy sector. And I'm looking at one very sort of narrow part of this, that is demand-side response behaviors for individuals or individual energy consumption, looking specifically at flexibility, peak shifting, and sufficiency, but also looking a little bit broader at other CO2-related behaviors as well. In the sense of those are the behaviors that I'm seeing what is happening there for behavior change interventions. And of course, the value, I think it's already been mentioned a few times, but the chance to have more sensors, to have more data that are new because of smart meters or because of even user provided data into a smartphone app or into a platform, has given the opportunity to connect behavior to actual CO2 impact or to an energy impact. And the digital tools we have that we're developing, or that are also in these projects that I'm looking at, are also communicating that data or that information in new and hopefully more accessible and interesting ways. So the digital innovation is happening on two different aspects of this. And in that sense, there's some potential for digital innovation to actually address some persisting challenges in these behavior change interventions. Namely, I'll just put three here, but there's quite a few more. Engagement of diverse audiences with energy behavior change, reducing the scale up and the impact of these interventions on larger audiences, as well as maintaining behavior change, how to support a habit formation. So besides the sort of maybe obvious potential of these digital innovations, as well as funding that went into them, and with, of course, the urgency of addressing climate change issues, there have been a lot of people that have noticed this potential, and this has resulted in literally thousands of apps, smartphone apps, being developed for CO2 footprinting of an individual, or measuring different devices at home to check the electricity consumption of different devices. It was reported in one paper in 2019, there was 2,000 smartphone apps available in the US App Store, in Apple Store. So there's really quite a lot. And on the other side, there's definitely hundreds of research-driven, not only smartphone apps, but also in-home device projects, online dashboard tools to help support an energy behavior change intervention. So there's sort of two different groups of people, of experts, working towards the same goal, using some of the same tools. And so I was curious about how they're approaching this problem, and if there's anything we can sort of learn between the commercial focus and the research focus. So that's sort of the framework of what I'll be talking about. I took documents from both sides and I coded them for the audiences that these projects are focusing on. Who do they want actually to have the behavior change? And what was the outcome, the desired behavior change? That was the goal. And what approaches they were using, what theories and what techniques with their tools or in the whole intervention were being used, and where were the challenges that came up. And then with the ultimate goal of looking for of lessons that could be passed between these groups or to support more effective interventions. So I had two different sources of documents. On the left is the commercial source, so the commercial behavior change designers. I interviewed 6 of these people last year. They were from the UK, France, and Switzerland. And they were people that were having projects or businesses. They're sort of entrepreneurs, or they're in larger companies working on feedback projects, mostly with smartphone apps, but not only, but other digital tools as well. And they had been interested in they had an intrinsic motivation to address sort of climate change and energy issues. So I have the interview transcripts from them. On the right-hand side is the research documents that I collected from 19 EU-funded projects. So they're actually all Horizon 2020 projects that were completed between 2015 and 2020. Earlier projects had sort of no digital tools or very old-fashioned tools, digital tools. And so I took this time frame and narrowed it down to 19. And these projects are all primarily focused on individual behavior change around energy. But we'll look at that more in detail in a second. Just a little bit more detail about the EU research projects. This all came from the Cordis database, and the documents that I took were either the reporting documents that they needed to submit for the EU, published papers, published articles, conference proceedings, or even descriptions from their project websites. And this is just a handful of the icons from some of the projects, which maybe you've been actually part of. And the analysis was then a coding process of the transcripts and then the research project documents for the audience. Who were they focusing on? How did they describe these people? Where were those people located? How are they using the energy, whether it was in a building or maybe outside because they were moving around? What was the desired outcome of the behavior change, the direct or the indirect impact on energy? And if the documents, if there was any mention of challenges that they had. Another thing that I was coding for was what was the explicit or implicit behavior change theory that was mentioned. None of the commercial designers were explicitly talking about theories, but they would have sort of their causality narrative to understand how behavior could be changed. So they would somehow implicitly talk about that, and they would also talk about the techniques that were used to achieve that behavior change. So there's a connection between the theory and the technique. And I started with a database for these theories and techniques coming from the Behavior Change Project at UCL, headed by Susan Mishi, where they're doing sort of health interventions from a health psychology perspective. So this was a good database to start with, but I saw through the coding that there was a little bit more that comes from sort of these environmental psychology approaches, as well as some techniques that are missing because they don't actually cover the possibilities using these digital tools. such as the sort of advanced gamification. So this is a sort of evolving list of theories and techniques. And if anyone has done something related to this, I would be very happy for comments in the chat, or you can write to me directly about this. But I'll just jump into the results. So these are just some initial analyses that I've done. There's a kind of a lot to dig into, but I'll just show a few things for now. So first, looking at the audience, so the users, and the desired behavioral outcomes. So here's sort of a diagram showing the connections between the user groups, that's the blue symbols in the top left, and the desired behavioral outcomes in the red in the bottom right. And the lines represent when a user and an outcome was mentioned in the document. And the thickness of the lines represents the frequency. And here you don't see much difference in the thickness, but on the research projects in the next slide, you'll see a bit more. So these are only in the commercial designer interviews, what combinations of users and outcomes came up. And I just highlight a few things, that the focus was often on not electricity and heat specifically, but other energy use, and also looking at more CO2 related impacts, so embedded energy, specifically food, mobility, or consumption. So they were often talking about wanting to have a broader impact, not only about electricity consumption, but something that was a bit more meaningful, more tangible. And the way they talked about their audience was often situational. So social constellations were brought up, people at school, people in families, or also their attitudes. So the users they were trying to attract were environmentally conscious or politically green leaning, and that was the target that they were going for. And this is quite in contrast to the research constellation here. Here you see a lot more lines because there were more projects reviewed. And you also see the thickness of the line quite drastically different, because here the focus very much was on heat and electricity use reduction. So there were very targeted outcomes of these projects. And as we've seen already in the previous presentations, this kind of focus actually requires a certain infrastructure and data availability. So the projects were often tied to houses with smart meters or access to buildings, which were often then public administration buildings, because public administrations were project partners. So there was a preference for data access and infrastructure that fit the project goals. So just a little summary of this, there we see between the two groups that there's a difference in the ability to access people and data between the two, and it's pretty pragmatically chosen which ones they then target, as well as the differing incentive structures. The commercial designers often spoke of needing to find a viable business model in order to keep themselves employed and also have an app that had a future, because otherwise it would not be able to create the impacts that they wanted. So they were needing to show bigger impacts than maybe the focused, targeted work of a research project. So looking on the theories and the techniques, here on the vertical axis on the left are some of the theories that were mentioned, and on the right, on the top horizontal are some of the techniques that were used to sort of instrumentalize the theories. And this is just a extract of a much larger matrix where there's more theories and more techniques, but I just chose a section that has a bit more connections here, and it's similar to the previous diagrams, that the darkness of the cell, the darker the green, the more frequent the connection between the theory and the technique. And this is only for the commercial designers. And just to highlight a few things here, the theories that they talked about, or the way they talked about the behavior change happening, they talked about social influence. So it was about people being influenced by role models, by peer pressure, in order to change their behavior. Also about the belief about capabilities, so that people could learn and have a better ability to save electricity or save CO2 by riding their bike to work, that was a process that they could learn and they could be more capable in order to have a smaller footprint, for example. and that attitude mattered. So if people were more environmentally friendly, they would also act more environmentally friendly. And so those were the implicit theories that were discussed, and they were implemented through some of these techniques. Feedback as a common one. So if someone was changing from driving to work to biking to work, that they would give the feedback in the app, for example, of the saved CO2. And some other techniques are particularly enhanced by the digital tools as well, such as prompts. So reminders coming from an app or coming in an email to remind about a certain goal that was set for CO2 reduction, for example. As well as message novelty, being able to send new messages or personalized messages to people in a behavior change process, as well as aesthetics and design. So having a digital space allows for a lot more, let's say, different types of gamification to be used, as well as visualizations for an understanding of the data a little bit better. And I think I will just quickly go through this last slide, so I don't want to take up too much more time. I also looked at how the commercial designers were approaching some of these challenges that I had mentioned before, so engagement, awareness, and longevity. And they had both some solutions to these problems, or they talked about some solutions to these problems, but also had new challenges for themselves. So just to mention quickly that they saw that digital tools allowed for faster engagement, getting people onto an app, giving them feedback right away, that this quick experience helped with engagement, and that smartphone apps still have a future. People are still going to be on their phones, and they still see this as a good medium to use. On the other hand, working on smartphone apps in the commercial space is extremely competitive. They really need to find a business model to compete with the other thousands that are also out there. And while it is relatively cheap to build up an app and to run it, if people really want to live from that and make a business around it, the focus gets shifted sometimes away from the impact that it can have in order to actually get the investors' money. So some questions that are still open for me in this analysis are: what's this connection between the theories and the techniques? Is there one, and can that be further exploited? And looking at the possible synergies between researchers and commercial designers, can there be better collaboration to help solve some of these persistent problems that are in the behavior change space? And nonetheless, always with this longevity question, is behavior change a longer process where we need to be able to address different facets of life, different phases of life, and is are digital tools helpful for reaching longer term change? So thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to take any direct questions in the chat or at the very end.
Thanks a lot, Devon. And that's a very interesting presentation. Our next speaker is also Francesca Cellina, is also based in Switzerland. She's a researcher at Francesca, you can already upload your presentation while I introduce you. Francesca is a researcher at the University of Applied Sciences and Arts of Southern Switzerland. She performs interdisciplinary applied research activities to foster the transition towards a low-carbon society, particularly in the domains of mobility and energy consumption in buildings. She explores ICT tools and devices and participatory living lab approaches and co-creation methodologies in order to engage citizens and stakeholders in real-life interventions, triggering the needed social transition. Francesca, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to present my work, which is actually a work of a large team. Here we put the names of the researchers who are part of this project that I will present to you. They are part from my institution, University of Applied Sciences of Southern Switzerland, and part from the Zurich University of Applied Sciences. And Devon, who has just given her very interesting speech, is also part of the research group. we are working into. So what I'll present you is called Social Power Plus. It's an ongoing research. It's about a project we have just started a few months ago, and in which we aim at empowering households to energy sufficiency through actually an app. So not a commercial one, but a prototype that we are developing for research, and an app that is co-designed with interested citizens and aims at actually performing a broad engagement at the community level to a community energy challenge. This app builds on previous experience and the previous project we ran together with the same group of researchers within the Social Power Project. That project was something that we ran a few years ago, and it was based on availability of smart meters for electricity that could provide us with easy and quick information about the electricity consumption by households. And therefore, we developed an app that was providing these households with feedback on their consumption, was providing also tips for reducing their electricity consumptions, and also suggesting challenges that they could work into. So something very easy and concrete and hands-on suggestions on how to reduce their consumption. But the novel aspect at the time of that app was that it was not only providing the feedback at the individual level, it was trying to create a community of users. So it was exploiting social relationships between the households that were using the app. And actually, we had two types of settings of this sort of game that we were offering. We had a collaborative setting in which the households were put on a team and they were asked to save as much electricity as possible. And on the other side, the competitive game setting, the households were put in two separate teams, and each team was requested to save collaboratively, as much electricity as possible in order to be better than the other team. Well, on average, in both situations, the collaborative and the competitive, what we obtained was something about 8% savings of electricity compared with the baseline period. However, the problems we had were that these savings were not maintained in the long term. So 1 year after the use of the Social Power app had finished. And also we had quite a lot of dropouts. So this means that actually we could not produce a large impact. So we would like to start from that experience in order to try to address the problems that we faced. And this is why we launched a new project, which is called Social Power Plus, that is actually aimed at addressing those problems. So the goals that we have in this new Social Power Plus project are maintaining the savings in the long term, first of all, then reducing the dropouts and the early abandon that we experienced. Then we would also like to include heating consumption, because we are totally aware that heating the heating consumption or heating purposes are those that are actually requesting more energy within a household. And then we would also like to include flexibility of consumption in order to support the households in exploiting electricity or energy provided by renewable energy sources. And therefore, we launched a few months ago this idea of developing the Social Power Plus Community Energy Challenge, and we started to develop targeted toolbox of technological devices that are actually supporting us in developing this new Social Power Plus Community Challenge. The design choices that we perform, which are key, we believe, we hope, for the achievement of our goals, are, first of all, the idea of engaging potential users in the co-design of the features of the energy challenge and the app that is supporting the challenge. So this is why we adopted a living lab approach. Then we would also like to exploit as much as possible already existing real-life relationships between the households that are put in teams in order to have somehow support between in-person previous relationships and relationships that are virtually performed through the app. And if possible, hopefully we are towards the end of the pandemic. So if possible, we would also like to have some in-person activities between the participants to the new Social Power Plus Challenge. And another element that we will focus on will be the sharing of experiences. In fact, in the previous version of the app, we only had mostly had, let's say, quantitative information that was shared among the participants to the Social Power Challenge about their team performance. We would like instead not only to provide them with numbers at this time, so not only how much energy they were saving at the team level, but also sharing their experience, what's happening, what's going on, what are you succeeding into when it deals with saving energy or using it more flexibly, and which are the problems that are still open that you want to share with other people in order to get their tips. And finally, the idea would be that we would keep providing reminders over time. So these challenges overall last about 3 months, but in this case, we would like to keep reminders for at least 1 year in order to see whether it's possible to avoid relapse to previous energy consumption behavior. From the point of view of the technology side, we are developing the app on purpose, and the app is actually supported or exploiting infrastructure for metering that is already available. So we are relying on electricity and gas smart meters where they are already installed. But in the case they are not available, we also rely on specific sensors that are capable of collecting the energy consumption into the household, together with a number of other elements from sensors that can then feed specifically developed load disaggregation algorithms that allow us to provide the users or the households with a feedback in terms of their electricity consumption for appliances, for lightings, and heating consumptions. And in a few cases where we have the optimal combination of the sensors and the smart meters, we are also capable of providing information which is disaggregated at large appliance level. So we are capable of telling the users when their fridge is consuming energy or the washing machine, for instance, is consuming energy. Practically speaking, what we expect that we could obtain through this Social Power Plus Community Energy Challenge is a change in very specific behavior that are routinely performed into the home. So regarding heating, for instance, we would like to reduce, for instance, the temperature by 1 Celsius degree, or induce the users to reducing the heating of certain rooms of the house, those that are used less frequently. Or let's say regarding the washing, first of all, we would like to support the users in a process of reduction of the frequency of use of the drying machine, or support the users in using the washing machine only when the sun is shining, so that they can actually exploit the full potential of electricity produced by photovoltaics, and so on. So these are the very practical activities that we expect to be performed in household through the support of the Social Power Plus Community Energy Challenge. We are actually going to test this in real life. We are working in the project with 3 utility companies in Switzerland in the region of Schaffhausen, Winterthur, and Wil. And each utility company will engage about 100 customers, 100 households, and they will actually together join the challenge. The fact that we are working with these 3 utilities actually provides an additional challenge from the technological point of view for us, because they are really endowed with totally different technology equipments. But in the end, we think this is still good for the potential of upscaling of the product in case it provides actually successful in achieving our goals. So we are already working in order to develop something that is quite easily adaptable to different systems, infrastructures, and technology. To assess whether this is effective or not, we will adopt a before-after quasi-experimental design, which means that we will have a treatment group, a number of households in each region, the 100 households, that will self-select themselves. We will make an open call for participation, and they will join the project. And then we will have a control group of households that are instead randomly selected between the customers of the utility company, and they are selected in order to match with the treatment group in terms of the composition of the household, number of members of the household, and type of the home where they live. And I can tell you what we have done so far. As I said, we just started. However, what we managed to do is to perform the activities of co-design in the living labs. So we recruited a number of interested households that were interested to support the creation or the development of the app and the energy challenge that will be provided later on in the field test. And again, we went to the 3 utility companies, to their customers, and the invitation was made publicly open. And we got about 15 participants, so 15 to 20 participants, let's say, for 2 workshops that we already have performed in each region. And those who participated were mostly men, not that young, because the average age was over 50. And there's a certain level of bias towards those who are already on photovoltaics, or in any case, it's definitely people who are already very interested in technology. However, they all said they have a motivation regarding supporting climate, or let's say opposing climate change, so supporting the environment. And they acknowledge that it's important that everybody can contribute to the climate and energy transition. However, what we've done so far, as I said, we have met them twice through online meetings, and we still have one final meeting which is scheduled for June. The idea of working with them was to discover the previous social power app and then to focus on the way that they thought a new version of this persuasive system could work. So we invited them to develop user stories to get their feedback on specific design elements that we were thinking of. So what we collected from them were suggestions that mostly supported our key strategies. They said they are very interested in opportunities for interaction with family, friends. They would like to get an internal chat to share the progress towards the process of change, and also to share the difficulties they have that they will face towards this process. They would like to get comparison possibilities with similar households, and this is really supporting our key ideas or key strategic design. Moreover, they said that they would be interested in getting individual information in terms of opportunities for setting personal goals for change. So this is something we will work on, identifying the best way to allow them to set their own goal for change, and overall to maintain the social dimension of the team that they are part of, and they are collaborating with in order to achieve the goal for change. So this is it, mostly what we've done so far. As I said, by June, we will have the design of the features of the community and of the challenge, and a first mock-up of the app available, so that the participants to the Living Lab will be allowed to test the mock-ups and provide us with additional feedback. And then in summer and in fall, we will develop actually the tools from the software point of view, so the software code. And the Social Power Plus community and the challenge is expected to start next year, early January. So we'll have 3 months of the challenge and then 9 months of notifications at the individual level. And of course, this means that we also have to start recruitment of the participant households for the treatment group. And we will do this between summer and fall. And hopefully at the next Behave conference, we will actually be able to provide you with the results of this intervention, and we will be capable of telling you what has actually worked and why and what not. So for the time being, I thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to address any questions you will have. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Francesca. Very interesting presentation. On Friday, ENR will announce the next, when will be the next Behaviour. I'm sure a lot of people will look forward to see the results of your study. Our last speaker for this session is Professor Rajat Gupta. Professor Gupta, you can share your screen now already. Yeah. Actually, this will be Professor Gupta's second presentation today. He's the director of the multidisciplinary Oxford Institute of Sustainable Development and the Low Carbon Building Research Group at Oxford Brookes University. He holds a senior professional chair in sustainable architecture and climate change. Rajat's research interests lie in evaluating building performance from a social-technical perspective, smart local energy systems, local energy mapping, scaling up energy retrofits, and climate change adaptation. And he has successfully won and worked on multiple large research projects, each with a budget of several million pounds. He is one of the directors of International Passive and Low Energy Architecture Network. He has delivered 50 conference keynotes and produced over 150 publications. Very remarkable achievement. Professor Gupta, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. So what I'm going to do is talk about smart local energy engagement tools in local energy initiatives and how they can be used for enhancing user engagement. I think the timing of this presentation is good because it comes after all the digital tools that have been just talked about. What I'm presenting is part of a very large research program. I'm presenting a very, very small part of that research program called Energy Rev, which is a 4-year research program in UK, brings together 22 universities, which are seeking to provide evidence for smart local energy systems initiatives in the UK. I'm leading one of the strands of work on something called SLEETs, which is Smart Local Energy Engagement Tools. Just to give some quick context and background, the UK energy system is becoming rapidly decarbonized, decentralized, and digitized, as with other countries as well. And here it's very clear it's to meet the net zero target. In fact, it's been announced yesterday that some of these targets might be brought forward to 2035 as well. Local energy initiatives can help in meeting these targets. They form an important solution because they can provide cheaper and cleaner energy services, and that too delivered locally with local benefits. And broadly, we say these projects can be either community energy driven, so they are more they have a social dimension and they are led or have active participation of community groups. They could also be local energy projects, which are more public-private partnerships and have active involvement of local authorities. And increasingly, what we are seeing in the UK is the drive towards smart local energy system projects. These are more multi-vector, multi-actor initiatives that can intelligently and locally balance energy demand with energy supply and also storage and distribution across heating, power, and transport. So these are some initiatives that are coming up. SLEETs, which we call as digital tools, are important part of these initiatives because they can integrate smart use of data and communication technologies to enable engagement and interaction with users. And these kind of tools can either allow users to manage their energy demand, control it, or even help in balancing demand and supply locally. And increasingly, we are finding with peer-to-peer markets emerging, flexibility markets emerging, that they can also help in getting involved in local energy markets. But despite the kind of expected benefits of these tools, there are relatively less number of studies that investigate the effectiveness of these tools in enhancing user engagement across local energy projects. And that's what we kind of set out to do. We wanted to examine the prevalence, the effectiveness, and how inclusive these tools can be in local energy projects. which combine, whether they're community energy or local energy or smart local energy projects, mostly in the UK, but some internationally as well. But I would say largely in the UK across, over the last 10 years or so. And we are trying to characterize sleeps in terms of their interface and the extent of interaction they offer, and then explore their relationship with local energy projects in which they were deployed to see, is there any relationship why certain tools were deployed in certain locations or certain projects. Uh, we identified, based on a systematic review of literature, about 111 sleeps across 86 projects. About 73 of those were in the UK. We were deliberately quite focused towards the UK because our program Energy Rev runs in the UK. And these, we then categorize them into 8 types. And I'll quickly run through those sleeps. Some of you know already, obviously, they're pretty well known, like the in-home displays, which kind of provide energy feedback in real time connected to smart meters. Quite a rapid growth of spatial mapping tools. We are developing one ourselves in the project, but these are more for local area energy mapping. Thermal imaging, which is a very visual way of highlighting heat losses through buildings. Online dashboards that can bring data that has been gathered through IoT or other methods quickly to users. Mobile apps that we've heard about, there are quite a few which can offer information as well as some control of appliances. Gamification, again, we've heard that previously in the session, which can allow users to not just find out about their energy usage, but also manage it, and also use gaming techniques in a non-game environment. Very less but emerging digital voice assistants, driven by either Alexas or Google Nest and other things, which can offer voice recognition services for running energy services. And then quite recent ones called digital energy platforms, which can offer users ways of engaging in local energy markets or peer-to-peer markets or flexibility markets. So when we came across these kind of 8 types, we had this kind of framework for characterizing them, and we took 2 important characteristics. One was the extent of interaction, which is here in the column, which is whether they were one way, so they were just giving information, or were they two way, so offering information as well as some interaction, or even going further and offering some control as well, or even going further and offering decision support. And then whether the interface was numeric, so numbers, visual, either colors or maps, or voice based. And as you find that quite a few of the sleeps that we came across, the in-home displays, the spatial maps, thermal imaging, they fall in numeric or visual. Very few are offering decision support, like digital energy platforms, and a couple of them, going towards digital voice assistants, which may become more popular as we get more smart devices in homes. We found that information driven tools were really more dominant, and there were about 54 out of 111 sleeps which were all information driven. And as I said, the voice based sleeps were the least popular. We then looked at what was the prevalence of these sleeps across projects. And as you can expect, majority of projects deployed multiple sleeps. So not just one kind of in-home display or just a digital energy platform, but quite a few of those, possibly to target different segments of people in their areas. We found that smart local energy projects deployed the most sleeps, which is not unsurprising because those projects are designed for having more smart use of data, for example. And we found DEPs, which is digital energy platforms, were very popular in SLES. They were not the most popular, but they were popular within the SLES ones. This is what we are showing here. And whereas in community energy projects, we found that the sleeves that were used were more information driven. So, for instance, thermal imaging was quite popular there. And in fact, we found there was a big program in UK in 2010 called LEAF, Local Energy Assessment Fund, that had sponsored 241 projects, largely community energy driven. And there, a number of sleeves had emerged related to thermal imaging, for example, and in-home display monitors. But they were largely about providing feedback, so quite one way, rather than encouraging interaction and some control as well. And you can see the spike here that happens in 2010, and then it kind of comes down. And then there's a slight rise with, I suspect the industrial strategy in UK was released, and there was a lot of work happening in smart energy projects, and then it's gone down slightly. We then looked at, which kind of projects had, been funding these, or where were they more dominant, and we found projects that were funded by government, regulators, or research councils tend to have more sleets, but whereas some other projects, had less number of sleets deployed. Uh, and also we found that areas where sleets had been deployed were in areas such as southeast or southwest, or the Midlands in the UK and Scotland, were really areas with growing grid constraints. So essentially, there are areas with grid constraints where smart energy projects are done, and sleets are then developed to kind of engage users with those energy systems. We also kind of spatially mapped, where these sleets had been deployed, at, for example, county level, and we started to overlay different data sets, and some interesting findings emerged. Like, for example, that sleets were prevalent in areas where there were large diffusion of local renewable energy generation. There were active community energy groups prevalent there. And also there were local energy action plans available with active local authorities in the energy area. And we found that's really interesting because you need those ingredients really for sleets to be operating effectively. We then looked at how effective these sleets had been, and this is of course based on review of literature. And essentially we found that most of them, as I said, were in smart local energy projects, and they were essentially integrated to support some level of behavioral change, energy reduction, and promoting energy efficiency. Relatively few sleets, and I think this market will probably grow with time, but for the moment we found that very few sleets were involving users in engaging with local energy markets. But that's because we have less number of local energy markets. They are being explored as we speak, so I guess more sleets will start to emerge in that area. We then also looked at what was the user engagement strategy in these projects and how were the sleets related to that. So remember, with user engagement, you can start from informing, going to communicating, involving, empowering. And we were trying to see, did the user engagement strategy determine what sleet was being deployed? And we found there was some correlation where we found if the project had an engagement strategy of informing users, then more thermal imaging type of methods were used. If it was more about communication and involvement, then more in-home displays, gamification kind of sleets were used. So there's some kind of association between the engagement pathway and the sleets. We then looked at, did any of these sleets consider inclusiveness, by which we mean, were they looking at groups who were in fuel poverty or vulnerable groups, or were they offering some level of training so that people could use these sleets? And we found that only 27 out of 86 projects actually even considered inclusiveness. Most of them were designed for a certain segment of population. But some of these projects did look at fuel poor households and vulnerable groups, although training was relatively few. You can see the gray bar here, which is really low. We then also found that these 27 projects were mostly led by either universities or the district network operators or community groups or some involvement of those. And they were really for improving user engagement or project acceptance or building trust. And that's why inclusiveness of sleets had been considered. So what are the kind of key takeaways from this kind of meta study of 86 projects and 111 sleets that we came across? I think there's some interesting takeaways, and this is my last slide as well. The first is that we unsurprisingly know that majority of local energy projects that deployed sleets were smart and local in nature, because these projects tend to be focusing on digitalization of energy. They are looking at smart control of local energy demand, distribution, and supply. But then most of them were still information driven, with a large amount of focus on analytics and unidirectional dashboards. We feel that to enhance user engagement, these tools need to move beyond this one-way flow of information to more two-way interaction and control. And that interaction could be between people and people, in terms of social interaction or policy making, or could be people and technology as well. which is quite important, if we want to get users to accept smart local energy systems. Interestingly, very, very few sleets were accompanied by any training of users through more inclusive modes of delivery, such as community events or in-home events. And we feel that there is some role for intermediaries here, such as community energy groups, for example, who are seen as trusted messengers and could be used to provide these kind of training sessions, which currently are very few. Definitely for sleets to become widespread within these local energy projects, we need to think about data and how transparent that is. Data transparency must be improved so that users know what data is being gathered of them and how is it being used. This is, of course, a very big issue as we go towards these connected systems. We also feel that, of course, they have a renewed role during the pandemic because they can allow more continuous user engagement with little face-to-face interaction. What we are doing today is an example of that. And definitely, it's worth exploring in the future how different groups of people are actually using different types of sleeps to engage with local energy management, because that might differ from let's say social housing dwellings to fuel power dwellings, or to those who are more environmentally conscious or those who are more technically savvy. There's much work to be done there, which is what we are trying to do in the next kind of couple of years. So I'm going to stop here. Thank you for your attention. The work is, as I said, funded by EPSRC through the Energy Rev Plus and Energy Rev Code program. Happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Professor Gupta, for the very interesting overview. And now we come to the questions and answer session. First, a question from the participants. Myung Kung asked Francesca, data collection regarding energy use is realistic. However, cleaning and analyzing data may take enormous time. Could you explain about the methodology you used shortly, particularly data management and analysis?
Do you mean for the comparison or let's say for the analysis of the effectiveness of the tools, or in general, the data that are then provided to the users into the app?
Yeah, she cannot speak. You cannot hear her, but you can see her question in the chat function.
Well, in our case, what we are going to do is to automatically collect data from three types of sources. One is the electricity smart meter, one is the gas smart meter, and the third one is sensor that was developed by a colleague of ours, partner in the project. The technology of those sensors, I really don't know how they work, so I cannot tell you. But regarding the electricity and gas smart meters, what we are going to do is simply to get what the utility companies are providing us directly. They are simply filtered because they are provided to the users a day after. So any kind of missing data is filtered and replaced with average data taken from the days before. So it's very, very basic, the operation we do, and definitely there's room for improvement and for correcting or making more reliable this information. But for the time being, we cannot do more than that. Directly getting the data as they are provided with a minor cleaning operation.
Thanks a lot. Yes, the data collection also during the abstract review, we do see some reviewers question. One thing is the size of the samples and how you avoid some biases also in the selection of the samples. That is a big question, or sometimes difficult to do for such kind of research designing. Yes.
Yeah. The size, it's about 100 users we hope to get in each region, so very small samples. But this is also an experimental intervention, so we have no resources to manage to reach out to a larger group of users. Also because we are doing these interventions in a region where smart meters are not available everywhere. So we have also limited population that we can draw from in order to have the participants to the sample. Yeah, for sure, those who will participate will be biased. They already have some intrinsic motivation to join this kind of activities because they are invited and they are free to simply ignore the invitation by the utility company to join. However, we think they can be representative of a part of the population that has these environmental concerns and therefore wants to do her part for the transition, but still has no resources, has no time to think about it, or just needs to be stimulated by someone else that is providing support. So this is what we are, the way we are designing the intervention.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, also this digital solutions is only one of the sessions. Actually, it's a digital technologies and solutions is used in the designing of almost all such behavior solutions or interventions. And in one question also today you heard from the previous session is the long-term effectiveness of behavior solutions. I want all the five speakers to reflect on this, how your findings through your research can contribute to the measurement of the effectiveness of behavior solutions and also improve the effectiveness of such solutions. So I will first ask, yes, Francesca, can you make a go on that topic? How make this more effectiveness, long-term effectiveness, and measurable effects?
Yeah, exactly. This is what we are actually trying to do because in our previous experience, we only got results in the short term, which was very promising. But then in the long term, the savings we had observed had disappeared. So what we try to do is with a strategy of building on the feedback and engagement of the individual, but also trying to engage the individual within a group of a larger community in which the individual has relationships, pre-existing relationships. And we hope that this is the right way to exploit already existing ties and to favor a long-term collaboration. Then what happens is that if the individuals are actually stimulated to repeat for a given period of time certain actions, then what we suppose that should happen is the formation of a new habit. And then there is the fact that as long as individuals are doing this together with other individuals, new social norms could emerge. And we expect that this can actually lead to a long-term, let's say, settlement of the new habits and guarantee a long-lasting impact.
Thanks a lot. Yeah. Professor Gupta, can you give your reflection on this question of long-term effectiveness and measurable effects of the behavior interventions using maybe supported with digital tools?
Yes, no, I think it's a good question. I think, as I said, what we found where these tools have been effective are projects where the tools got integrated in the delivery of the project itself. So, what I'm trying to say is if users had to have certain tools as mobile apps in their phone to be able to interact with their heat pumps, and that it was dependent on the users understanding how to use it, and sufficient training was given for users to use those tools, we found that effectiveness was deeper and more long lasting. It was more prolonged. Where tools were just added on. So let's say heat pumps are installed and you just add a app for people to go and look at how heat pump is working. None of the kind of users really went online to check that. So I think for me, effectiveness is going to work if it is accompanied by training, if it is accompanied by people to people interaction as well. And I think measuring that is not that difficult. You can, of course, measure it in the way that Francesca has just said. You can also measure it in the way of how usable these tools are. I think we don't look at usability of these tools, which is probably worth looking at through more qualitative ways, in addition to looking at energy reduction and all the others that can be measured.
Okay, thanks a lot. Devon, can you reflect on this question of long-term effectiveness of such behavioral interventions for energy, especially in the energy efficiency area?
Thanks for this question, because I think it ties a lot of the presentations today together. I think what my work kind of starts to highlight is that there's a lot of examples, as Professor Gupta mentioned, these leads that he had reviewed, and there's all these smartphone apps that are available, but how they are working in the long term is very much dependent on their business model. It doesn't make economic sense to continue to support these tools, as well as the embeddedness in the context that it actually makes sense and continues to engage people. So I'm thinking, by looking at the commercial perspective, that they may be able to give some insights on how to keep some of these well-developed apps and well-tested apps still then on the market afterwards.
Thanks a lot. Amirreza, also the question to you, this occupancy, especially in office buildings nowadays, is locked down or partially open, and this occupancy rate in many office buildings is low. So how do you find that your research can maybe contribute to this issue of energy saving in the new era of towards the global move toward the carbon neutrality?
Yeah, basically, the main aim of our solution is to be a long-term solution, because we have some sensors that monitor the behavior of the occupants in the offices. Then over the long term, we use this learning to better modulate and to better regulate the energy supply systems and adapt the energy supply systems to the behavior of occupants. And as you mentioned about the COVID-19 imposed home office working, basically one of the main aspects of the machine learning models is to be adaptive, because they are also learning and improving themselves based on the new data coming from the sensors. So they kind of automatically detect that there is no people in the building, and they adapt the energy supply to this empty period.
A lot. Verena, this issue of how to motivate energy conservation behaviors in the workplace also a bigger topic. How do you think your discovery findings, especially about the social aspects of motivating people's behavior, can be integrated in future solutions or technologies for energy saving in office buildings?
Yeah, so I think that this is a lot about knowledge transfer. So I think what we really need to think about is how to provide easy to understand information, because I think that people oftentimes can actually not really relate to any kind of energy related or strictly energy related information that we're providing. So I think that it is important to understand the triggers that can actually help to change the behavior. But before changing the behavior, of course, we also need to understand how people are actually behaving in the buildings right now before the behavioral change. So I think this is where our tool comes in order to gain a better understanding into preferences, user preferences, and interaction with controls. So that then, yeah, I think that summarizes it.
Thanks a lot. It's already over 4:30, so we need to close this session after this long day. I think all the speakers have their slides. If they agree, we can share those slides. Also, they have abstracts. The proceedings will be released on Friday, so you can see further details of their research. And if you have questions, you are most welcome to contact them directly. With that, I would like to thank all the speakers and the participants for this interesting session. And thank you very much. and see you tomorrow.
Thank you.